the ministry plus UNDP in areas of Mbale, Nakasongola, and Kasese. These areas were carefully selected because, one, if you look at the highland mountainous areas, Mbale in terms of rainfall receives annual rainfall of about 1,700, 1,800 millimeters every year. Nakasongola, on the other hand, only receives an average of about 700 to 800 millimeters every year. So you can see two different contrasts. And as I said, the too much rain will come with its own different extremes, but also the little rain also comes with different extremes. And all those have impacts on the gender relations. So the aim really for this was to try and assess the impact of these, the impact of climate change on the gender relations, but also map out the responsive strategies for mitigating the effects of climate change on the lives of both men, women, and children. So these are the summary of the key findings that may be considered. The first finding was the general acknowledgement that they are changing weather patterns. Because people knew when to plant, people knew when to expect a good harvest, because they also knew when the rainfall will begin and the rainfall will finish. And that gives a very significant indicator in terms of planning, not just for the farmers themselves as they are, but for the entire community as is, even those that are not so much rotating around farming as it is. The second one is, whilst they are those that recognize the changing weather patterns, there are those who still believe that it is the will of God. So what does that mean in terms of us moving forward on this? That you have to address that gap between the recognition that there are changing weather patterns, but also the recognition that there are people who still believe, and strongly so, that it is a will of God which is causing these changing weather patterns. So perhaps, what are some of the interventions that can be done to address that gap? And I'll come to that later. So there are also very many questions asked around what could be done. For example, if we're trying to agitate issues around afforestation and not preventing people from going into the forests and wetlands. The key aspect that comes out of there is that the lack of alternatives comes out very strongly. So how do we then ensure that we provide alternatives, well aware that charcoal may not go away from us in the medium term, in the short term, but what kind of initiatives that are we trying to promote as government of Uganda to ensure that these alternatives actually address the issue not just of afforestation or deforestation as is, but also the issues of avoiding the increase in emissions due to the activities that people are undertaking. As I said at the start, the provision of this information is key to planning. So one of the other key findings that there is that the limited access to weather and climate information. How people get it is also another thing that we can discuss it. Limited access for better planning, because once you get this information, then it can help you know what crops to plant so that it kind of addresses that gap of not only relying on God as it were, but also ensuring that you include scientific understanding and helps into the long-term planning. In terms of access and control of resources, we find that there's limited access or control of resources, especially when it comes to women, because then once calamities happen, then women are left at the center of playing the role of heads of the household. But when they don't have these resources in their hands, like land, for example, becomes extremely complicated for any meaningful adaptation or improved livelihoods as we see it want to be across the different communities. Another finding is about the gaps in the national policies on gender. For example, what another gap is on the national, the gaps in the national policies on gender. For example, how do you ensure that there is equal distribution of these resources between the people who have the burden of ensuring that households meet their obligations and the existing gender divides and ascribed roles and responsibilities as it is within the different communities. So what is it that can be done? For example, I talked about the lack of accurate weather and climate information, but also the lack of awareness at all. If people are saying it is the will of God, how then do we address that? So there is need to do capacity building and training so that all people have confidence in the kind of information that is being churned out, but also to understand that the activities that we do within our households and the agricultural practices that we undertake contribute to this climate change challenge. Promotion of gender-sensitive and climate adaptation and mitigation strategies is key, so that, because when you look at this, the thing that the study was trying to point out is that policies which the study found particularly important, for example, how do you increase access to land resources and promoting use of more fuel-efficient stoves and increasing access to water. In short, what this actually means, it's that in order for you to have functional adaptation, you have to commit substantive resources to ensure that, for example, you have increased access to safe and clean water within the different communities. In order to address the health challenges when it comes to using fuel, we're trying to talk about more fuel-efficient stoves, but also the idea of controlling resources, which actually are a basis for, as a basis of survival for most of the communities, as it were, because once the land resources are productive, it means the households are also very productive, and it reduces a bit on the kind of conflicts that will happen between the different households. The second key case study was something that we did with the IDRC and FHI 360, and we're trying to look at how to strengthen the adaptive capacity within the cattle corridor of Nakasongola, Nakaseke, those districts within that belt. And we're trying to determine the role and potential use of the ICTs in enhancing adaptive capacity among the different communities, particularly to three key things: water-induced climate change challenges, but also what it means when a drought happens. So the four key questions that we are trying to explore: the major water-related vulnerabilities within the cattle corridor. In absence of water, what will happen? But also, what are the impacts of the water-related hazards within there, and the relevance of the mechanisms that we have to use to promote or to address the hazards, as it were. And finally, how accurate and timely and relevant were the existing mechanisms for sharing climate-related information. I have not dwelled so much onto the first and three questions, but only I'm going to highlight the kind of responses when it comes to question 4, where we're looking at the relevancy of the relevancy and timeliness of the existing mechanisms of sharing climate-related information at community and governmental levels. We know so well that this information is supposedly meant to be shared through the broad areas as it is here. When climate information is developed, it either goes through mobile phones when you partner with telephone companies, or it goes through the different FM radio stations, or it goes through email, or it can be interactive as it is here, or it can be through print. Now, the challenge here is within our control districts was how accessible are these channels to receive this information. The question of how accurate it is was not really looked at so much, but how accessible first was this information reaching out to help adaptation of the different communities. And this was something which was done around a sample of 200 farmers. What this shows is that when it comes to disaggregation of the genders, as it were, that 49% of women actually said receiving information through, 49% of women were able to access that information using those different channels as I enlisted. What this means is that in terms of ownership of those channels and access to those channels, it is men who have an upper hand in accessing this information. Whether they use it or not is also something that we can try to explore. But what this study actually showed is that there's a higher percentage of men that actually access this information either through radios or interactive sessions as compared to women. As I come to a close, we've seen advantages in ensuring that we strengthen early warning information. And these are voices from the different stakeholders that we have worked with, from Sembabule to Soroti to Nakasongola. For example, using through the mobile phones, Annette is saying that mobile phone always stays with them and they can look back to understand what is said. But also the radio talk show is very important because you can call back and clarify if there's information that you need to clarify about. The only disconnect around this is that you may not have your radio all the time, but at least you can have your phone all the time to know the kind of information that has been shared through. When it comes to Joseph Mukasa, it's also the same thing. He was saying that he was trying to use this information which was being received through those different channels to guide him in terms of planting the different crop choices, but also crop management. So in terms of adaptation, I think, especially when it comes to agriculture, having a very clear early warning system, but also a very clear climate information sharing system is key to ensure planning and by extension improve individual livelihoods and well-being of the communities. To conclude, the study actually points to about 6 key things. That one, climate awareness is necessary so that you can dispel the perceptions that people have at district level, and here we can work we can continue working very closely with civil society. Water harvesting as something to address droughts is important. Localized weather information, for example, what are the specific localized weather information for Nakasongola within the 10 days? That can be done, and it can also be disseminated through the telephones or all those other medium channels that I shared. Coping to drought, water harvesting can be one of those remedies that we can use by coping to drought. Flooding, in terms of flooding, especially when it comes to the too much water that comes from especially the Mount Elgon region and ends up into the low-lying areas, dam building becomes key here. And in terms of livestock and crop market information, how do you ensure that the farmers, especially within the cattle corridor, also get information related to livestock and crop market information? But these, as it were, are just some of the quick and immediate actions that can be done to address some of the challenges that we are faced with. In terms of medium to long term, these are not the kind of actions that we talk about. We are talking about transformative actions that may go beyond, for example, water harvesting, that rooftop water harvesting, but actually undertaking engineering solutions that will require to ensure that once torrential rains happen in Kasese, it's not something that will repeatedly happen to cause devastation, as we always say, we always see. But in the short term, I think these are some of the key actions that the study tried to point out. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much and open for any questions and clarifications. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for Bob, who's done a fantastic job. I know Bob was saying if there's a burning question, and I think I have a minute or two in case there is a burning question. And he can't wait for the coffee, because the coffee is brewing, and it can wait, but the questions may not wait. And in case you have, okay, I guess all of us are looking forward to our coffee. Honorable Songa, I wanted to mention that your colleague, the Honorable Chiaga Henry, is here. Thank you, Honorable Member of Parliament, for joining us this morning. Many people may not know you, but he's the man who beat a minister in the race. And if you want any other details, you can ask me. I'll tell you the other name he uses. So, but here he is here as a Member of Parliament, so he's not here with the other name, so I will not mention that. So thank you, Honorable Member, for joining us this morning. So we'll take a quick 5-minute break for coffee. My request is let's pick the coffee and return to the room, and then we can continue with the presentation. For those of you who are online, who are joining us, please do stay with us. Just give us 5 more minutes. We should be back. We have a key report, the assessment on the compliance of the 2021-2022 budget to climate change interventions. It's really critical that you stay with us, and those of you who are also here in the room. We need to assess the performance of our budget versus climate change interventions, and how that also speaks to our NDP III. And the one and only Ronald Kagwa will be sharing this assessment. So let's take coffee. Coffee is served just outside in the corridor. Pick your cup of coffee and something small and return to the room. We should be back in the next 5 minutes. Thank you very much.